Welcome to the T-Files with Tara Palmer. I hope you enjoy the show this evening.
Hello and welcome to the T-Files with myself, Tara Palmer. This evening I am going to talk about the DeFeo family massacre, which is in reference to the Amityville Horrors. Now, not many people know that the Amityville Horror itself, that was made into a blockbuster and was also written in a book, was a hoax. And the gentleman and woman involved, George and Kathy Lutz, have admitted this since. But there was more of a sinister past to the property, and that is how they came about the idea of inventing this haunting and what went on with it and things like that. So I have, I believe, covered the Amityville Horror in a previous podcast that I've done. So what I thought I'd do this evening is talk about the Amityville Horror, the case before what happened at the property. And whilst discussing that, I will throw in a few bits about the actual Amityville Horror, the case itself, as we know it. Now, people have seen the picture of the house. It's an iconic Dutch colonial style building, and it's very beautiful. And it resides at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, Long Island. Now, what people don't realise is this property is still there, and it's still, even now, it goes on the market, and people are oblivious to what went on in this property. Now, I'm not talking about the Amityville Horror, the haunting that we know. I'm talking about the murders that happened. Now, it's best known today for the extraordinary account of a haunting at the house in 1976. The Amityville Horror, as it was soon known, became one of the most famous incidents of paranormal activity ever recorded. It would inspire a book and a successful series of Hollywood films. Now, for those of you that are actually interested in this, if you do watch the films, watch number 2 first, then watch number 1, because the account of the murders of Ronald DeFeo is incorporated into the second film, and then the first film follows on from that. Now, the first film is an account of the young Lutz family being tormented by demonic pigs and plagues of flies and green slime oozing from walls. And it terrified readers and moviegoers, because I remember when I was young, mostly a teenager, and I read these books and they fascinated me. And because I was young and gullible, I soaked up the words that I was reading and I believed them. I believed it happened. And when people said, oh no, that can't have been so, I would be on the defensive, of course. Why would they lie? And things like that, being young and naive. Now, it terrified readers and moviegoers, all the more so because it was labelled as a true story. One surprisingly little known fact about the Amityville Horror is that it was an admitted hoax, as I said before. George Lutz and his wife Kathy invented the haunting with the help of their lawyer and literary agent William Webber. But the paranormal version obscures a very real horror, one far more frightening and mysterious than the fanciful tales of poltergeists Hollywood gave the world. Because in the same house, less than 2 years earlier, one of the strangest and most baffling mass murders in recent history occurred. The first sign that something was terribly wrong in this picturesque Suffolk County coastal village of Amityville in America came at around 6:30 p.m. when a frantic local resident named Ronnie Butch DeFeo Jr. burst into Henry's bar with a shocking story. He's quoted as saying, "You've got to help me. I think my mother and father were shot. Several of the bar's patrons immediately rushed to the house, where they were hit with a stench of death. DeFeo's mother and father were both shot in their beds. Worse still, 4 of their children had been slaughtered as well. One of the men, Joe Yesware, called the Suffolk County Police with the awful news. On their arrival, a search of the house confirmed the worst news ever. Every member of the DeFeo family, save for Butch, which was Ronald DeFeo, were dead. The victims were Ronald DeFeo Sr., who was 43, Louise DeFeo, the mother, 42, and 4 of their children, Dawn, 18, Alison, 13, Mark, 12, and John Matthew was 9. Each of them had been shot execution style at close range as they slept, and all 6 were found laying in their beds face down on their stomachs. As police trawled the house, the lone survivor, Ronald Butch DeFeo, cut a forlorn figure outside, refusing to go in. DeFeo mentioned to officers that he felt a mob hitman was responsible for the killings, a suggestion taken very seriously because of the methodical way the family seemed to have been killed. DeFeo was taken into police custody for his own protection, but didn't stick to his mob story very long. Within 24 hours of being arrested, the surviving DeFeo had made a shocking confession. He claimed he had murdered his entire family all by himself. He is quoted as saying, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." After the murders, he admitted he took a shower, changed his clothes and disposed of the murder weapon. With a full confession, the subsequent investigation seemed straightforward. At around 3:15 a.m. on November the 13th, Butch DeFeo had awoken, and for reasons that may forever remain unclear, he took a .35 caliber Marlin rifle and systematically shot all 6 members of his family. But even some of the detectives, keen to quickly wrap up their biggest ever murder case, could see there was something very wrong with this story. How had Butch shot 6 people in 4 very different rooms without any of them waking up? And this has always been a question on my mind. How had no neighbours heard the rifle blasts? If everyone was shot in their bed, how had blood splatter got on the floor and the dresser? Many people had begun to feel that Butch could not have acted alone. Unburnt gunshot residue on DeFeo's sister, which was Dawn, even indicated that she may have been involved. Now, were there other gunmen in the DeFeo family massacre? Well, that's something that we will talk about shortly. But I'm going to play a clip of when the police went round to the house. It's a news clip, but I'll let you have a listen and see what you think.
He came, he opened the door, and he was screaming, "Come on, help me, somebody shot my mother and father." And everyone ran out of the bar, and that was it. They all took off. No, I had to stay. I was tending bar. They all jumped in his car and took off.
Today, police combed the DeFeo's handsome 3-story house for clues while divers explored the backyard swimming pool for the still unfound murder weapon. Police have been questioning the son, Ronald, and now say he is being, quote, safeguarded. Investigators say without explanation that they now feel young DeFeo was in the house at the time of the murders, but they're not yet considering him a suspect.
And so forth.
No suspect at this time. We have no indication of the motive at this time.
What about Ronald DeFeo, the son, the surviving son?
Ronald is being safeguarded by the Suffolk County Police at this time.
Why safeguarded?
Why? Because the 6 members of the family dead, and we don't know why, and he's the sole remaining member.
Is he also a suspect?
He's not a suspect at this time.
Few people in the neighborhood knew the family well, but those who did described them as close-knit.
Well, I think they were just very sweet, very religious people, very family-minded people. And that's about all I could say. Very good, very generous. this type. They're very close with their children.
There's one element in the usual mass murder story which seems to be missing from this case. There's no sense of fear in this community. No feeling of a mass murderer on the loose. People we talked to seem to feel that whatever was the motive for this crime, it had something to do with the family. It's not something that's going to return to bother anyone else. In Amityville, Long Island, Phil Barno, News Center 4.
So even at the time, the police didn't suspect him at all. They really did think that someone else had committed these murders. Now, once he had admitted that he was the perpetrator in this case, he went to trial. And at the subsequent trial, Ronald DeFeo Jr. proved to be a terrible witness. His story constantly changed, and his erratic and strange behaviour alienated him to everyone. He even threatened to kill the judge and his own lawyer. On November the 21st in 1975, he was found guilty on 6 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 6 concurrent 25-year sentences, although he is unlikely to ever be released. But despite the conviction, it was clear that there was a serious problem with the official story. The court had determined that DeFeo had acted alone, killing all 6 members of his family with a .35 gauge Marlin rifle. DeFeo had supposedly shot each victim as they slept, and both prosecution and defence agreed he hadn't used a silencer. Now, how had DeFeo committed the shooting alone without any of his family waking up? Now, I've always wanted to know this. I mean, defence experts had conducted an experiment on the Marlin rifle and found in its report that it was so loud that it could be heard almost a mile away. A mile! Now, according to the autopsy and ballistic reports, each victim was shot as they were found, face down in their beds. It seemed none of them had been awoken by the shots, and none of them had put up any kind of struggle or tried to hide or flee or anything like that from the scene. Ken Gregsky is the former Amityville police chief, and he was one of the first law enforcement officials at the scene. And to this day, he finds it hard to believe that DeFeo could have committed the shootings without any members of his family waking up. He's quoted as saying, "Why someone wasn't able to get out of that house is beyond belief." Now, what made this particularly inexplicable was the locations of the 6 bodies, strongly suggesting DeFeo could not have committed the shootings so rapidly that nobody had time to react. In fact, DeFeo had shot a total of 8 ear-shredding shots, estimated to be at 140 decibels each, in 4 different rooms of this huge sprawling house, across 2 different floors, and yet it seems he had not disturbed anyone. Nor did any neighbours hear the shots. 112 Ocean Avenue was not an isolated property. It's surrounded quite closely by other homes, and when police interviewed the residents, nobody reported hearing anything at all except the barking of the family dog. Dr. Howard Edelman is a Deputy Chief Medical Examiner of Suffolk County, was present at the crime scene and personally conducted the autopsies on the DeFeo family. He testified at the trial he felt it was impossible one person could have committed the crimes. He's quoted as saying, "Even if they were sleeping, the report of the weapon that was used is supposed to be so loud that it would have had to, so to speak, awaken the dead, and neither had any of the victims been drugged." Right, I'm going to go for a quick break, and I will come back and continue talking about this in a moment. Hello and welcome back to the T-Files with me, Tara Palmer. We're discussing the Amityville case that preceded the book and film that came out, and it centred around Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. Going back to what I was saying, even if they were sleeping, the report that was written on the weapon that was used is supposed to be so loud that surely it would have woken someone up. Now, this has always been a question in my mind, why no one woke up. I mean, people have obviously hypothesised over the years, oh, maybe they were drugged or something like that. And they did extensive toxicology on them, and not only was the blood and urine, but all of the organs that they removed, and it turned up zero. There wasn't anything in the body at all to say that they were drugged or anything like that. The idea that Butch DeFeo had committed the crimes on his own was becoming, at the time, increasingly untenable. Even the man who secured DeFeo's 25 to life prison sentence for the crimes was prosecutor Gerald Sutherland. He long suspected that there was other shooters involved. He's quoted as saying, "I wonder about the questions that were never answered. Did any of the victims wake up? If so, why didn't any of them defend themselves? Why were all six found face down in death? Why didn't anyone hear the shots?" Now, this gentleman wrote a book in 1981 called High Hopes, and it talks about this case. If then, as seemed likely, DeFeo hadn't acted alone, who could have helped him commit this horrifying crime? Several investigations and authors have suggested that Butch DeFeo's oldest sister, Dawn, played some part in the shootings. The first 5 victims were on the second floor of the DeFeo house. Ronald Sr. and his mother, Louise, were both shot twice in the master bedroom. Moving across to the other side of the house, the gunman then shot 2 boys, the brothers, Mark and John. Completing the second floor shootings, 13-year-old Alison DeFeo was shot once in the head. That's a total of 7 shots at 140 decibels each, before the gunman even started to ascend the stairs to Dawn DeFeo's 3rd floor bedroom. It is therefore unthinkable that Dawn, entirely unsedated or drugged, would not already have been alerted to a gunman before they had even arrived on the 3rd floor. Yet, as we have seen, she appeared to be peacefully sleeping, face down in her bed, having made no attempt to escape, defend herself or hide. You've got everyone's laying face down and everyone's dead, no one's run away. Now, there are theories to maybe some of the children, not necessarily Dawn, but the children woke up. They've seen their brother and he's gone, it's okay, lay back down again. But even if he'd have said that, they wouldn't automatically lay on their tummies for him to shoot them through the head. They're going to ask questions, aren't they? They're not going to be drowsy or dopey. They're going to be awake and alert because of these huge bangs that are going on. But, yeah, it's just always baffled me. Now, had Dawn, as some suspect, actually participated in the shooting herself, only then to be shot by her brother and placed in her bed, I mean, could that be a theory? Although Butch DeFeo is notorious for the sheer number of contradictory stories he has told about the murders over the years, one of his more consistent accounts is indeed that Dawn took part in the killings. In most versions of his story, he has claimed responsibility for the murder of his mother and father and showed little remorse for that, but he has often blamed Dawn for killing the family's children, Mark, John and Alison. After discovering what she had done, DeFeo says he then killed Dawn after a struggle with the rifle. Some evidence does actually exist to tentatively support this scenario. Dawn seems to have been killed somewhere other than her bed and placed there after death. Crime scene investigators discovered that Dawn had suffered a huge head wound and that brain matter and blood was on her pillow, bedclothes and her nightgown. Yet her white headboard, just inches from her head, was pristine. It was clean. There was not a single bloody mark on this. The lack of blood splatter was strongly indicative that she had been shot somewhere else and then placed back into her bed. Blood splatter was also found on a dresser and on floorboards in the house, again demonstrating the possibility, at least, some of the shootings had occurred away from the beds. Some investigators have speculated that unburnt gunshot residue found on Dawn's body indicate she may have handled a firearm or ammunition, although the prosecution expert at the trial, Alfred Della Penna, thought this could have occurred as a result of muzzle flash when Dawn was shot. Rick Moran, amongst the first group of reports at the scene the night the bodies were discovered, has studied the DeFeo murders for more than 40 years. He is sure that Dawn was involved in some way. Moran cites one of Butch's DeFeo's strangest claims among his many conflicting statements as evidence. DeFeo has said several times that on the night of the shootings, he was watching TV in like a drug-induced haze when a strange black hooded figure came to him and handed him a rifle and urged him to commit the murders. Moran thinks this figure could have been Dawn. According to the reporter, Dawn was often spotted by neighbours wearing a black snorkel-style coat, which may have led a heavily stoned Butch to mistake her for the sinister figure. Although clearly highly anecdotal, Moran says that one of his contacts at the Drug Enforcement Agency backs up the story. He told Moran that someone from the DEA actually had the house under surveillance the night of the murders due to a suspicion that Butch had been smuggling drugs in his speedboat. The DEA agent had supposedly observed Dawn in her black coat leaving the house with a rifle, getting into a car and driving off in the direction the firearm was subsequently found by police. If Dawn and Butch plotted the murders together, could Butch's incapacity due to heavy drug use have spurred Dawn to commit them herself? And once Butch had come down, had he shot Dawn after the horror of what she had done dawned on him? On the face of it, this scenario seems far-fetched, but it does help explain many of the puzzling and intractable issues within the crime scene, and evidence from the trial indicates Dawn's mindset may have been disturbed enough to make her taking such extreme actions seem at least plausible. Dawn's boyfriend, William Davidge, stated to the court that Dawn was a habitual user of LSD and mescaline, and had recently started to become extremely hostile towards her parents because they had refused to allow her to live with him. The DeFeo family were by all accounts dysfunction and troubled, and Ronald DeFeo Sr. was reported to have been particularly violent, controlling and abusive to both his wife and children, all commonly cited factors in patricide or parental side. Butch DeFeo has given several different versions of the murders in which people other than Dawn DeFeo were part of the conspiracy, but with little or no evidence to support that, Dawn remains the most likely candidate for the extra shooter. In the hours following the shooting, when police interviewed local Amityville residents, many told the detectives they felt Butch DeFeo was responsible. Considering the reputation DeFeo had developed in the sleepy community, it was not so surprising that residents immediately felt he had committed the atrocity. Over the years, he was continually in trouble for his thuggish and erratic behaviour, theft and drug abuse. During the run-up to the murders, DeFeo's drug taking had become particularly acute. By his own admission, he was consuming huge amounts of heroin and marijuana and drinking a bottle of scotch every day, despite already being on probation for drug crimes at the time. His violence was spiraling out of control, At the trial, much testimony was offered for DeFeo's temper and obsession with guns. One witness recalled how DeFeo had held a shotgun up to the head of a young man during a hunting party and watched stony-faced as the man turned white with fear. On another occasion, DeFeo had held a 12-gauge shotgun up against his father's head during an argument and even pulled the trigger. The shotgun failed to fire, and DeFeo Sr. reportedly found religion soon afterwards. So, and I've always found that quite amusing. I wouldn't say a religious person, but I'm certainly a spiritual person, and I do believe that there is a God, as people call it, and things like that. But surviving an incident like that, I wouldn't necessarily then turn to religion. But obviously DeFeo Sr., I mean, he can beat his wife and children and be violent and controlling, but it takes his son to pull a trigger and misfire for him to find God. Psychologists subsequently diagnosed Butch as having antisocial personality disorder, displaying little or no empathy for people. Some speculated that his many different accounts of the murders were attempts to shift blame for the deaths of his siblings to anyone but himself. Whilst DeFeo showed no feelings for his mother and father, and he detested his father, he would always become agitated and upset when talking about the deaths of his brothers and little sister. If he could successfully convince others, and perhaps even himself, that someone else had killed the children, it may have helped to assuage his own guilt about the murders. One of the major problems with the multiple gunman scenario is the testimony of the prosecution's ballistics expert, who stated all of the wounds to the 6 victims were made with the same firearm. A study of the wounds to the DeFeo family and the expended cartridges found at the crime scene indicated 8 shots had been fired. All 8 shell casings were found and forensically linked to the .35 caliber Marlin rifle found by police thrown in the dock directly behind the house. Although Herman Race, an experienced criminologist hired by the defence, disputed this ballistic evidence, it seemed quite conclusive, but it did little to reconcile the enduring and seemingly intractable contradictions in this case. To this day, no truly satisfactory account of what happened has ever been offered. Butch DeFeo is no help, seemingly lost in his own miasma of lies and delusions, and everyone else who was there is dead. All we know for sure is that 6 lives were destroyed. 7 if you count Butch DeFeo, who will surely die in prison. Whatever happened that horrible night in Amityville, the truth may be forever lost amidst fictional stories and ghosts and demons, I suppose. Right, I'm going to take a short break again, and I will be right back with you.
The T-Files here at Parasearch UK Radio, discussing hauntings from around the world, the facts and the hearsay about each case. Was it real haunting or an elaborate hoax for monetary gain or fame? Listen and discuss with me, Terra Palmer, here at the T-Files.
Join Paul Rook live at 9 p.m. for the Trident Paranormal Show, where he will be discussing and explaining everything from the strange, weird and the paranormal myths and legends. From fact and fiction, we have all on the Trident Paranormal Show.
Join Jay and Teresa Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. with their paranormal hindsight from across the USA, only on Parasearch UK Radio.
Join Richard Clements on Thursday nights at 10 p.m. for the Mystery Hour, only on Parasearch UK Radio.
Hello and welcome back. I'm discussing the Ronald DeFeo Jr. case that preceded the Amityville Horror films and haunting that was hoaxed in the 70s. I've got another clip for you to listen to, and it's how they think there is a second shooter, and it is a news report, and it tells you how they feel that a gun found after the crime, many years after the crime, could have actually been part of the crime itself. So I'll play that and see what you think of that.
It was a crime that gripped our area. 6 family members wiped out in a gruesome mass murder, inspiring one of the scariest movies ever made, the Amityville Horror.
37 years later, a claim that new evidence has been discovered is raising questions. CBS 2's Jennifer McLogan has the exclusive details from Amityville.
Who can forget those windows? Windows like eyes. They make the house in the movie Amityville Horror look so haunting. As terrifying as the 1979 movie is, the real-life events that inspired the blockbuster are much more frightening and are still on the minds of Amity, Long Island residents today.
I wouldn't go in there at night. You hear all the ghost stories.
I feel sorry for the people that live there.
It was a very tragic story.
Police in Suffolk County, New York, have charged 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr.
It all unfolded on November 13th, 1974, when 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. used a high-powered rifle to shoot and kill his parents, 2 younger sisters, and 2 little brothers, while they all lay sleeping in their beds. DeFeo later confessed to the killings, telling police voices from the house made him do it.
I think that's a pretty open and shut case.
Or is it?
This crime did not happen the way that it's commonly accepted.
Instead of 1 shooter, could there have been 2? A second gunman?
We firmly believe that there was indeed a second gun involved in the commission of the crime.
Ryan Katzenbach, who's working on his 3rd documentary about the murders, insists more than 1 person was responsible. And he says he has the documents and now the evidence to prove it. This exclusive video obtained by CBS 2 shows a team of underwater archaeologists Katzenbach hired, looking for evidence in the canal behind the house. Just 5 weeks ago, he says they hit the jackpot. They found a gun.
Once we cleaned it off, you could see that there was a trigger and the handle and everything else. The police were on site all morning, and as soon as we brought it to shore, it was turned over to them, to their crime lab for a forensic ID.
Katzenbach says this new evidence confirms a long-standing belief that, in fact, DeFeo did not act alone. He needed help to kill 6 people.
How could 1 person walk through a 3-story Dutch colonial house and shoot 6 different victims on 2 different levels, and no one got out of bed, no one put up a struggle?
Other details about the case, taken together, he says, add up to a second gun and a second shooter. Take a look at this crime scene photo of what appears to be a pillowcase found in a trash can next to the canal.
We knew that DeFeo had used pillowcases in the commission of cleaning up the crime scene.
After the killing, police say DeFeo used a pillowcase to carry the rifle and other evidence that he took from the house and tossed it all in a storm drain. They also found this handgun holster, but no gun. Katzenbach says that missing gun is the one his team pulled out of the canal. Other details from the 1974 police report also point to the possibility that someone else helped DeFeo kill his family, says Katzenbach. From eyewitness accounts to crime scene photos, even handwritten notes from the detective, he says it all adds up.
But Suffolk police say not so fast. They stand by their original findings that only 1 gun and 1 shooter killed this family. They insist no one else is at large.
People are very creative, and the internet allows them to pull up items that they think are facts, when in fact they're not facts.
Still, Katzenbach says he obtained every record Suffolk County has on the case and believes evidence was overlooked once they had a suspect and a confession.
And to chance DeFeo getting a new trial out of this on the basis of new evidence, I just don't think it's someplace that Suffolk County wants to go.
The gun is still being examined, but with decay and no legible serial number, it may be impossible to ever identify. From Amityville, Jennifer McLogan, CBS 2 News.
And DeFeo, currently serving 6 consecutive sentences of 25 to life. Since his confession, by the way, he's changed his account of what happened numerous times.
All right, let's...
Now, you can find these clips on YouTube if you write in the real Amityville or Ronald DeFeo. Yeah, so, and it's spelt Ronald, R-O-N-A-L-D. DeFeo is D-E-F-E-O. And if you pop that into YouTube, you'll get up lots of documentaries. And there's even a little clip of him chatting and things like that. And obviously he's aged quite a lot now. But let's go back to, as I was saying, the excuse me, the psychology as such behind Ronald's life and what happened to him and things like that. Now, he was born on September the 26th in 1951 in Brooklyn, New York. He was the oldest of 5 children born to Ronald and Louise, and he was a successful car salesman, and she was his wife, and back then that's what she done, that was her wife. Now, Ronald Sr. worked at his father-in-law's Brooklyn Buick dealership and provided the family with comfortable upper-middle-class lifestyle. But he also served as a domineering authority figure and engaged in hot-tempered fights with his wife and children. The most frequent target of abuse was their eldest child, which would have been Ronald, of whom much was expected, being the eldest. It only got worse at school, where the overweight and brooding boy was the victim of relentless taunting from his classmates. Now, as Butch matured, he began lashing out physically against his father, as well as his few friends. His concerned family took him to a psychiatrist, but the visits didn't sit well with Butch, who denied that he needed help. The trips to the doctor stopped, and in their place, the DeFeos used the incentive of cash and presents, including a $14,000 speedboat, in the hope that the gifts would placate their troubled son. But the new tactic only made the problems worse, and by the age of 17, Butch had become an LSD and heroin user and was expelled from school for his violent outbursts. In spite of his academic setbacks, the DeFeos continued to reward their son, even though there was nothing to reward him for. And at the age of 18, Butch received a prize position at his grandfather's car dealership with little to no expectations. He also earned a weekly stipend from his father, regardless of his attendance or job performance at work. Butch, he funneled the salary into his new car, another present from his parents, as well as guns, alcohol and drugs. Now, Butch DeFeo's strange behaviour seemed only to increase with time. He threatened a friend with a rifle, as I said earlier, during a hunting trip. And then later that day he acted as if nothing had happened. He attempted to shoot his father with a 12-gauge shotgun during a fight between his parents. He pulled the trigger at point-blank range, bear in mind, but the gun malfunctioned. And his obviously surprised father ended the argument, but was left stunned by the confrontation. And this incident foreshadowed the more violent offences to come. In 1974, Butch, feeling irritated by what he believed was a meagre salary, plotted methods for embezzling money from his grandfather's car dealership. In late October of that year, the dealership entrusted DeFeo with the responsibility of depositing more than $20,000 to the bank, and Butch planned a mock robbery with a friend, agreeing to split the money evenly with his accomplice. The plan went off without a hitch until police came to the dealership to question DeFeo, Butch. Instead of calmly answering the officers' questions, Butch exploded into rage. When the police became suspicious that Butch was lying, and they asked him to come to the station to check out mugshots of possible suspects, he refused to comply. Ronald Sr. began to suspect that his son had committed the robbery, but when he questioned his son about his lack of cooperation with police, Butch then threatened to kill his father. Now, we know that in the early hours of November 13th, 1974, he acted on that threat, and he used a .35 caliber Marlin rifle from his secret gun stash, entered his parents' bedroom, shot them while they slept, entered his brother's bedroom and his sister's, and he murdered the whole lot. And apparently it's meant to have taken about 15 minutes. He then showered, dressed for work, collected his bloody clothing and the murder weapon in a pillowcase, and he dumped them in a drain on the way to work, to the dealership at 6 o'clock in the morning. He arrived at work. He then tried to call home, pretending not to know why his father hadn't shown up, saying he was bored about midday-ish. He left work and spent the day with friends. He attempted to secure an alibi by telling each of the people he visited that he couldn't seem to reach anyone at home. And at 6 p.m. he called a friend in mock surprise, saying that someone had broken into the house and shot his family. Now, friends came to the home and contacted authorities. They came out, and they actually... The detectives questioned Butch about who could be a suspect in these murders, and he told them that he believed a mafia man called Louis Fellini may have been responsible. Butch cited an old grudge between the men had made and the DeFeo family over some work Butch did for him at the dealership. He then told the police that he'd been up late watching telly and unable to sleep, left for work early. He said he believed his family was alive when he left for work, then told them of his whereabouts for the rest of that day. Police put him in a protective custody, didn't they? Because they thought that this hitman was going to come and kill him. After the police obviously carefully searched the DeFeo house, his testimony began to crumble. They found an empty box for a recently purchased .35 caliber Marlin in his room, and as the timeline kind of gelled together, it seemed more realistic that the murders had happened early in the morning, and that the family had all still been wearing their pyjamas, so it couldn't have happened earlier in the day. Now that placed him at home, didn't it? And when they questioned him about this new evidence, he began changing his story. He said that Fellini had appeared at the house early that morning and put a revolver to his head. He then said that Fellini had accomplice dragged Butch from room to room as they murdered his family. And as the story unravelled, police extracted a confession from DeFeo, and he finally broke down. And once he started, he said, didn't he, earlier, once I started, I just couldn't stop it, and it went so fast. So they had the trial, and they put him in prison, and things like that. So, being that he's been bullied at school, he's got an overbearing father, his mother, by all accounts, is quite a meek, mild woman. He's got quite a few siblings, a lot's expected of him from his father, especially so. He's going to have been under a lot of pressure from a very young age, and being unable to cope with that, he has turned them feelings inwards, and unfortunately at some point he's then exploded, hasn't he? And it's gone the opposite way. Right, I'll be right back after this short break, and I will speak to you very soon. Ronald DeFeo obviously had a drug problem as well, didn't he, and a drink problem. And he's had a tenuous, stressful upbringing with a violent father, a meek mother that obviously didn't defend her children. And he was bullied at school as well. So growing up, he would have been very, excuse me, he would have been very angry at the world. Instead of going in on himself and becoming withdrawn, he held all that anger in, and he would explode at times that was unexpected. But he then, to maybe get away from them feelings of unloved, unwanted, unneeded, the bullying and the low self-esteem and low confidence that he had, he would have taken these drugs to escape these feelings and consumed alcohol as well. In October of last year, 2016, there was a article on the New York Daily News, and as I've discussed all the things that went on with it, what happened was he claims that voices in the house made me do it. I don't believe for 1 second that Ronald DeFeo is schizophrenic or has voices or anything like that. But that is where the Amityville Horror that we know comes from. Because when the Lutz family moved in, 13 months after the murders, they were able to feed off of the back of that, and were to things like, for instance, he killed all of his family at around 3 a.m. and the Lutz family claimed that George Lutz woke up around this time every morning when they moved into the house, and he would go out and check the boathouse at the same time DeFeo carried out the murders. And you've got, after the murders, DeFeo went into Henry's bar in Amityville where he shouted for help and claimed someone had shot his parents. It's the little bits that add up that they then rode on the back of that and made the film that we've all seen today, the old and the new one. I personally, why he decided to kill his family remains unclear. He's never confessed to why. He's never given his reason. Some do believe that he did it to collect life insurance policies on his parents, because after the killings he asked the police what he needed to do to get his hands on his father's policy. Now, of course, there are also the highly talked about idea that some kind of paranormal, supernatural force inside the house made him do it, which played a big part in the horror movies that the Lutz made. But then, let's go on that tangent for a moment. Say the house had some form of negative energy and it influenced Ronald DeFeo into killing his family, whether or not he was in a drug-induced state or not. The point is that this is where it gets crazy in my head. None of the family woke up. None of them. Not one single one tried to hide, tried to flee, or anything. And they were all found face down, and they were shot where they lay, except for Dawn. Now, as I've discussed, Dawn could have been a second shooter. He could have come out of a drug-induced haze, realised what he'd done, and then shot her, which is why there was other bodily parts away from where she was originally killed. Where she was laying in her bed. Now, if there was some form of supernatural entity within the property, would that have been able to have quietened the shots of the gun that was used, that, as has been expertly admitted, shoots at 140 decibels and had no silencer. Now, none of these people were drugged in any way. So, if we go supernatural force, it affected Ronald. He then went from person to person. It, for however or for whatever reasons, was able to subdue the noise of the gunshot so that it didn't wake anyone else up. So he wouldn't have killed them in his right mind. But then, even after he come out of this environment and out of his drug-induced haze and whatever, he would have been able to give some form of semi-intelligible response as to why he done it. He wouldn't have changed his story as many times as he has. That just goes to show that he is severely mentally ill and doesn't want to admit to what he's done. Although he has admitted it, saying it and believing it are two different things. You get people that are sadly ill and they're addicted to things like drugs and alcohol, and they will stand up at their groups and they will say, my name is such and such and I'm an alcoholic. But saying it doesn't mean that they accept the fact that they are actually dependent on that drug. And maybe in Ronald DeFeo's mind, although he can stand there and say, well, yeah, I shot him off. Yeah, I shot him. It's words. It's easier to say that, to shut them up, than it is to say it and accept it and believe it. Maybe Dawn wasn't involved. Maybe he's blaming Dawn on some of this because he doesn't want to accept the blame for the murders of his siblings, of little children, really, isn't it? I mean, we'll never know for sure, unfortunately, even though he is alive, and that if you really wanted to, you could write to him and you could ask him yourself, not that you'd get an intelligent answer from him. But, I mean, even up as October of last year, the house is still for sale. But what happened was the address of the house was changed from 112 to 108 Ocean Avenue after a previous owner of the house worked with the post office and he got it changed. But it's a 5-bedroom, 3-bathroomed home and it's listed for $850,000, and you can look at it through Coldwell Banker Harbour Light owner and broker Jerry O'Neill if you wanted to look it up, and things like that. But so you've got this troubled boy. He's grown up. He resents his father, resents his mother. He hasn't really got much time for his brothers and sisters anyway. He might love them in a way, but not like people of, I won't say normal, because what's normal nowadays? But the average person, the way they love their siblings. A lot's expected of him. He can't cope with it. He's bullied. He takes drugs. He drinks alcohol. He's pressured at work because he feels that he's got to do it again for his dad. He's witnessed violence. He's had violence put upon him by his father, and he smokes too much cannabis. He injects too much heroin, and he snaps. And afterwards, maybe he can't accept it, and that's why he changed his story so many times. That's why he blames his sister for part of it. Maybe she was part of it. Maybe she was just as messed in the head because of their upbringing as he was. And maybe it did go down like they suggest. He was in a drug-induced haze and she appeared and things like that. But then they said the police were outside and they were on surveillance because of thinking that he was bringing in drugs on his speedboat. But then if the shots were to be heard up to a mile away, why were the police sitting outside and not going to the property the moment the first shot was fired? maybe they'd driven away by then. Maybe they'd given up and thought, oh, he's gone to bed, we'll come back early in the morning. I don't know. I really don't. But he took the lives of 6 innocent souls, really, didn't he? I mean, not so much his father and his mother, but the 4 children were innocent. And then you've got the Amityville Horror on top of that was able to piggyback. And they made a lot of money from that film and that book. And they portrayed it as true events. And you can look it up on the internet if you so choose to. And I do believe there are YouTube videos of George Lutz, and he does admit to hoaxing it and to have faking most of the paranormal said activity that went on in the home. Now, films, as we know, embellish things and exaggerate, so you can't watch a film and go, that's exactly how it was, because it will never be like that. Like The Conjuring, that's based on a true story, but I have, in my previous podcasts, I have explained the difference between based upon and inspired by. There is a huge difference. But you've got these 4 little souls, and then you've got the mother and the father that have been shot. I'd love to know how he done it. And I don't mean that like, well, he walked up the stairs and went bang and bang, and, well, why didn't they wake up? That has always been a thing on my mind, it really has. Why didn't they wake up? Why didn't they try and run? Even, as I said before earlier, even if he had shot one of them and the others got up to see what was going on, and he's like, oh, it's your big brother, it's okay, don't worry. They're not going to voluntarily go back in their rooms, lay face down and allow themselves to be shot, are they? They're going to at least ask questions, sit up, look around, be scared and things like that. I don't know. I mean, was there a second shooter? Maybe Dawn helped him. That seems very plausible, doesn't it? And in his half-drug-induced state, he's come round a bit and thought, oh my, what have I done? What has she done? And just taken her out, killed her. I find it very interesting that that is the real case of Amityville. And then George and Kathy Lutz come out, bought the property, and rode on the coattails of Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. And it's a shame they felt the need to do that when it was on the back of innocent children being brutally murdered in their beds. But there you go. 'Tis the world we live in, folks, I suppose. Right, I would like to thank you very much for listening to me this evening. Next week, I've got a few shows coming up. I'm going to be doing the Winchester Mansion, which is where the Winchester gun was made, and the daughter, and the story about how she kind of lost her mind and things like that. And I'm going to be covering Reginald Christie as well in one of my shows. So yeah, there are a couple to look forward to. Right, thank you ever so much for listening, and have a lovely week. Have a safe week. Take care. I hope the weather warms up. I really do. But I shall speak to you all next Monday. Thank you ever so much for listening.
Thank you for tuning in to the T-Files. More next week. Same time, same place. Don't be late.